I had an opportunity to think about the monarchy a few months ago now, actually. It was last year when I was on debate night, and it was in Glasgow, and it was their under 30s session, so everyone in the audience was under 30. Now, before they start the cameras rolling on debate night, they always have a kind of practice question, just to kind of get us warmed up and get the audience warmed up. And it was around the time of Prince Andrew's rather unfortunate television interview where he explained about getting his sweat glands shot off in the war or something like that. And as part of this discussion, because I was playing to the crowd a bit, that's my job, and the audience were quite up for it, I kind of went, "Abolish the monarchy!" And the room went, "Way!" And so this is clearly an idea whose time has come. There is clearly an appetite for this conversation, particularly among young people. It doesn't, as Assa says, it doesn't really make sense to a lot of people. So I think now that we've all gone mainstream and we've got, the Greens are in government and stuff, I think it's really good that we're having this conversation, that we're continuing to push this bar forward, that we're not sitting on our laurels, that we're saying, what's the next big injustice? What's the next big difficult conversation that we need to have, and making sure that we're at the lead on that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your inputs today and having that conversation about how we move that bar forward. Because this would be a really, really big deal for Scotland to become a republic. That's a non-trivial thing. That is a historic change. And so to be at the kind of forefront of starting that conversation. Incidentally, on the train home from that, I rode the train back to Edinburgh with Alex Cole-Hamilton. And as you do after these sort of things, we both called our media teams to tell them how it went. And of course, I could hear what he was saying to his team. And he was like, "Oh, didn't go very well. Oh, not sure." And it's not really our crowd. And I'm thinking, if the young people of Glasgow aren't your crowd, it's not looking good, is it? Anyway, finally last summer, I got around to reading the Hilary Mantel series about the court of Henry VIII. And within that series, there's a fictional conversation between one of his courtiers and the king, in which the courtier is trying to explain to the king that the wars that he wishes to fight will cause hardship for his people. And the fictional king answers, "But it's the job of the people to support the will of the sovereign." And that raises a very, very interesting question. Do the people exist to support the will of the sovereign? Or does our government exist to support the will of the people? Are we the subjects of a sovereign, or is the government a servant to us, the citizens? What is that? And in the UK at the moment, we have this weird sort of halfway house, because we talk about us in Parliament as serving the people. We've got a couple of different democratic parliaments. We're serving the people, and yet every single one of us in Parliament has to swear to be the subject of the Queen and all her heirs, or his heir, and it'll be king now. And that's this weird sort of topsy-turvy halfway house mix where we haven't really agreed on whether we are in fact citizens or whether we are in fact subjects. Now, my parents are big fans of the monarchy. My parents grew up in England, but now live in Canada, because they see the monarchy as a quaint, harmless anachronism. In their mind, we've taken away the parliament, Parliament's taken away the power of the monarchy. They just sort of dress up in funny costumes, and it's quite nice to know they're around, And they consider them to be harmless. But the question I have is, in the context of where we are in the world, inequality, climate emergency, is enormous wealth ever harmless? Is vast wealth harmless? And we talk about that a lot. Can we afford billionaires? How much is too much? And I am of the opinion that vast wealth is harmful, that it creates a distortion in the power dynamics, that it distorts democracy, that you cannot have vast wealth and effective democracy living side by side, because people with vast wealth can distort that democracy, especially if they are the monarchy who have special privileges and can write dodgy letters to government, or can ask for, don't make me tax or do environmental things on my estates. And that is not an effective democracy. That is not harmless, and it is absolutely not trivial. I think it also plays into the stories about how we see ourselves. And if we are telling ourselves the story that for this one family, it is true that their role in society is determined by their bloodline, but that's not true for the rest of us. For the rest of us, it's on merit. Damn it, you have to work for it. No, but they're special, they're different. I mean, that is the story we used to tell, that blood mattered, that inheritance mattered, that who your ancestors were determined who you were. Is that the story we really want to tell, or rather do we tell a different story? Because there's very much in our certainly in this country, a different story about what we tell about the rich and what we tell about the poor. To incentivize the rich, you have to give them more money, obviously. To incentivize the poor, you have to take their money away because they might get lazy and get used to that. And so all of this is part of the story of how we treat the rich very differently how we treat everyone else. We tell different stories about them. They're special because of their bloodline. We're only special if we work, tie our bootstraps up and pick ourselves up. So I'm so interested to get into these conversations with you today about how we see our monarchy, how we see the future of our democracy, and how this might evolve going forward. So thank you very much. I will now introduce Patrick to give us his thoughts on the subject. I don't know if you want to come up here, or are you happy there, Patrick? I don't mind either way.
Yeah, I'm okay here, if that's okay. Thanks very much, Lorna. And yeah, I kind of feel as though I could give this very kind of high-level overview, and it would repeat an awful lot of what you've said, because I think you've covered a lot of the key principles really well. You used the phrase harmless anachronism, was it? A kind of slightly eccentric, harmless anachronism. If that's all the monarchy was, I wouldn't really object. I've got quite a soft spot for eccentric, harmless anachronisms. I quite like eccentric, harmless anachronism, but I don't believe that's what the monarchy is. And there is, from a Green point of view, first and foremost, a question of power and accountability. If we think that democracy is the legitimate means for holding power accountable, for making decisions as a society, why on earth would the pinnacle, the head of state, the highest office in the land, be the one that's exempted from that democratic principle? There may not be hard political power attached anymore in the way of passing legislation or enacting policy. That's done by government, and the monarchy is supposed to just rubber stamp it. But there is a huge amount of unaccountable influence. And because it's unaccountable, people are quite rightly suspicious of it. Even when there has been no attempt to misuse that influence, the question remains. The question can't even be answered. Lorna and I, as government ministers, we've agreed by taking that office to follow the ministerial code. And so we are not even allowed to confirm or deny if the monarch has written to try and influence a piece of legislation. It doesn't happen as often as people might think. But the fact that it's secret, the fact that it's unaccountable, is one of the reasons that feeds that mistrust. Another of the issues came up, even just when we were doing the introductions. Assa, you used the word citizenship. And it comes to this question about whether we are citizens or subjects. I think we should be citizens. I think citizenship should be where power originates from. Power begins with the citizen exercising their voice, exercising their vote, and yet we have this strange hybrid, this notion that we have to continue with this idea of people as subjects of a monarch while still behaving as though the opposite is the truth. We have these two ideas trying to coexist in the same space, and ultimately they will conflict. As a Green, one of the arguments that comes up time and time again when we challenge the idea of the monarchy is the track record of individuals within the royal family on environmental themes. Well, if you're an environmentalist, you should be really happy that Prince Charles, or King Charles as he is now, he's a passionate environmentalist, isn't he? But because this power and this wealth are so unaccountable, he can get away with massive over-reliance on aviation, for example, in the way that he conducts the business and the affairs of the royal family while continuing to make speeches about climate change. You can get away with the use of land that should rightly belong to all of us, but organized in a way that not only continues the biological and ecological depletion of our country and the use of it for wealthy people to go hunting, shooting, fishing for fun, but it's unaccountable in the opportunity that's been lost to manage that land in all of our interests. His old man, the former queen, the late Queen's husband, Prince Philip, whatever else we might think about his values, his attitudes, his behavior, he was a champion of the World Wildlife Fund, the Worldwide Fund for Nature as it is now. Why wouldn't we as Greens support that? But I think he was in many ways embodying the idea of environmentalism that really needs to be let go of, the idea of human dominion over nature. And the fact that he was able to be described as an environmentalist and have that relationship with a global environmental body while still being willing to kill wildlife, megafauna, including rare and endangered species for fun. The idea that these things can coexist is offensive, and I think it challenges us to say, what do we think environmentalism, sustainability in the modern age really is about? And it's not held by the values that I've just described. The last thing I want to say in the introduction, though, is not really about the things I dislike about the monarchy. It's about the opportunity that we're missing by having something that really allows people to express their view about what kind of country we are. And for me, it came most clearly, it was just a little bit after the Brexit vote, and Michael D. Higgins, the President of Ireland, had been invited to come and address the Scottish Parliament. This had been in the diary for a long, long time. So it'd been long time planning. It wasn't, kind of particular reaction to the events around the Brexit vote, but he had clearly not only thought long and hard about what he wanted to say about the relationship between Scotland and Ireland, and about our place in the modern world, about our long history as neighbours. He'd also reacted to this cataclysmic vote, this Brexit vote, that he knew Scotland had voted against just, I think it might have been a week and a half, 2 weeks or something between. And he'd rewritten this speech to take account of this vote and to contemplate and to provoke us into what it meant in that moment and what would it mean going forward. He wasn't doing it in a party political way. This is someone who was an elected politician. Before that, he was a poet, but he's now the President of Ireland, and not doing this in a party political sort of polemic way, but in a provocative and a thoughtful way. It was about a 45-minute speech. I think it's still on the Scottish Parliament website if you care to go and have a look. And every 5 or 10 minutes, it went up a gear. And it engaged the audience really, really emotionally and powerfully. It talked about the challenges of previous generations, how we'd come through challenges like world wars, how they'd impacted us and shaped us as peoples and societies. He talked about how we were facing the modern age and the challenges around modern communications, around economic turmoil, around things like Brexit, and how do countries cooperate with one another on the world stage. And he talked about the challenges in the transition to a sustainable society and how we can make this possible. And every few minutes it went up a gear and it became even more engaging and powerful as a speech. And then the next week, the Queen came and spoke to us. And she wasn't unpleasant. There was nothing nasty about it, but it was 5 minutes of, hello, I'm the Queen. This is the Parliament. I like Scotland. It's very nice. Goodbye. There was nothing. I mean, there was no substance. There was nothing to engage with. And some people might say, entirely appropriate, because the Queen shouldn't be making a political speech. But there is something in between this bland constitutional ceremony and a polemic party political speech. There is something in between which Michael D. Higgins captured in his 40-odd minutes of speaking, which is to embody the ideas that we all share, that bring us together, that are not part of party political division and disagreement, but embody something that we share that expresses who we are as countries. And Scotland doesn't have that. Scotland has a vibrant and lively and sometimes polarized democratic process. It has its own parliament. I wish we had the ability to make more decisions in that parliament, but we have that democratic level. But we don't have the ability for the people of Scotland to choose someone who embodies collectively who we are and to speak in that more uniting way that the President of Ireland managed to capture on that day. And so I think, as well as objecting to certain aspects of what the monarchy is and how it operates, I really miss, and I think we would be so much richer with, what we don't have. The opportunity that's lost of not having the opportunity for the people of Scotland to choose a head of state, not as an executive president like the US, and not merely as a bland ceremonial figurehead rubber stamping things, but someone who can express something real and passionate about who we are as a society, not in a party political way, but in the way that extraordinary politician, poet, Michael D. Higgins manages for Ireland. So those are my initial thoughts, not just what I want to reject, but what I would love Scotland to have with an elected head of state.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Patrick. I'll invite Assa to give us her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. So when I was invited at this event, I had to think a lot about, what a republic means, what the monarchy means. I'm really trying to keep an open mind about what the monarchy is and understand the arguments of people who support it. So I'm going to confess something here. I find the monarchy absolutely compelling. I find it's a fascinating thing to watch. I find it very exotic, to be absolutely clear with you. It's glamorous, there's a lot of drama, and then I think, oh, it's actually taxpayer funded. And I just think, I struggle to see a single good argument for keeping it in the 21st century. One of the main arguments in favor of the monarchy is, it's a sign of stability. Its continuity, its stability. And I'm thinking, have we lived in the same country in the past 5 or more years? The UK is very unstable. I don't think it's the role of one person or one family to, keep the country stable and bring the country together, especially when they're not chosen by the people. To me, it blows my mind that this is even a debate, that this is even a discussion. Obviously, I'm French. France has had, a very complicated history with monarchies. The kings famously ended quite badly in France. And the Republic, when you look at the history of France, since it became, the states that we know nowadays, republics have only been a minority. And it was a fight. It was really a fight to have a republic. So, for example, if you go back to the 19th century, the Third Republic, it came after a big military defeat and the people starting to really, clamor. They invaded what is nowadays the National Assembly to demand a republic. And the Third Republic stayed for 70 years. It brought free, universal, secular education for all. It expanded voting rights, etc. And now we are in the Fifth Republic, which was voted in, I think, in 1958, something like this. We have a constitution, which is the fifth constitution. We change the constitution all the time. We've changed it, I think, 24 times. Only 1/3 of the articles of the current constitution are original articles. I think a republic allows for flexibility. It allows to reflect the values of the people, of the society as it is today. And in times of crisis, people discuss the constitution more. They want to really assess if things are working out, if actually we need to change the rules to make sure the republic is a functioning democracy. And I think this is what is happening in France at the moment. I'm sure you all know that there are massive protests concerning a pension reform that is really seen as extremely unfair, especially for people who have had long careers, difficult careers, for women especially as well, who have to stop working mostly to raise their children. They have lower salaries, so that means that when they reach pension age, they have lower pensions. So it's deeply, deeply unfair reform. People have been demonstrating for months, but it seems that the government and the president in particular is not listening to them. So people are thinking, maybe the president has too much powers, there's not enough democracy, there's not enough participation, maybe we should have a sixth republic. And people are really, this is something that you will hear in TV debates, you will hear politicians talk about it, you will hear citizens talk about it. And I think this is, when I think about what it means to be a citizen of a republic, I think that we have this collective consciousness that we are, what binds us is the fact that we are a political people. We make decisions together as citizens, and the people we elect as head of states, they're one of us. They're supposed to be one of us. They're just one citizen. They don't sit above us, and we have no deference towards them. And I think this is really, really important, and that cannot exist in a monarchy. And I think in the 21st century, when we talk more and more about equality, about fairness, about equal chances, the fact that someone who was just born in the right place has immense wealth, immense privilege, and is supposed to represent a whole nation, I find this very problematic. And another argument that people who support the monarchy have is that, we are a United Kingdom. This is, the monarch and the royal family. They bring us together. They are, they embody our sense of nation. And I think this really, I don't really see that. Most people I talk to, especially after the death of Queen Elizabeth, even before, during the Jubilee, I asked a lot of people, so are you going to celebrate, for Jubilee? Are you going to do something? And most people just don't really care about the monarchy. They don't especially actively hate it and protest it, but they don't feel it's part of their lives. It's not part of their daily lives. They don't think about it that much. They're very indifferent. So thinking that this is what brings a nation together, I think maybe you need to find something else that brings the nation together. What are your common values? It can't be because, of just being born. That is just very, very strange. So I think with the coronation, it's an excellent time to talk about this. Some people will say, oh, actually, we're in a cost of living crisis. People have more pressing issues. This is futile. It's harmless. But, I think, again, in a time of crisis, probably the best time to talk about this and how to make sure that in the 21st century, you have a country, you have institutions that actually reflect who you are.
Thank you, Assa. I'm so glad we have you on this panel in terms of someone who is able to look at our insanity from the outside. Because it is different when you grow up with it. When I was a little kid, my mum used to try and correct our table manners by saying, what if the Queen came to dinner? And even as children, growing up in Calgary, we thought that was ridiculous. Anyway, our final speaker this morning is John, and I'll let him introduce himself and get on.
Thank you. So hopefully you're convinced. But of course, that leaves open a very broad and very important question, which is, what are we going to do about it? And our republic was founded, as many organizations were, through Twitter. A group of people were talking, and they were cross-party, and they realized that they were Republicans. They wanted to talk about republicanism in Scotland, but there wasn't a body that did that. And so during the lockdown period, when a lot of people decided to make big changes in their life, a group of people decided, let's form our republic and let's try and create something that is more Scotland focused and focused on bringing about a change in the head of state in Scotland. And our republic is effectively trying to do three things. First of all, what it's trying to do is create a space where those who have a Republican mindset can talk about it. It's a very weird aspect of our culture where every poll that goes out demonstrates majority support for a change in the head of state in Scotland. It is something that is basically agreed upon in this country that we should have an elected head of state. But there's nowhere for us to talk about it. There's nowhere where the discourse is active and alive. And so we wanted to change that. And so we're trying to create spaces for people to have those discussions. The second thing our Republic is trying to do is we are trying to campaign for a Republic in Scotland. So we are trying to attend media events, talk to people, be a place where newspapers and everyone can come and find out information on how you would go about bringing about a change in the head of state. And thirdly, what we're trying to do is work out how you actually do it. Because we are in a country with an uncodified constitution, which means that there are not many written rules about how we actually go about doing things. It's all kept in privilege and it's all kept in this weird omerta where you can't quite figure out how you would go about it. And we're trying to unpick that. How do you actually go about a process of disentangling the power structures that sort of sit over our parliament, sit over everything we do, and allow that access to our politicians and our ministers by the crown, by the palace, by the king, however you want to put it, that allows them that power and that unaccountable power. How do we start making it more transparent? How do we start removing? So one of the first things we wanted to do, and Patrick actually helped us with this at the time, was we wanted to try and get rid of that swearing allegiance to the Queen at the time when you came into Parliament. Turns out we can't. The Scottish Parliament does not have that power. It's reserved, which is unsurprising in some ways. And now what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring about a change so that even if we can't stop Crown consent, even if we can't stop the Crown from interfering, at least make sure that when they do, it is transparent. Treat them like any other lobbyist. If they want changes to be made, if they want exemptions written into law, well, okay, but we get to publish that. We get to let people know, because at the end of the day, transparency is the first point at which we can begin disentangling some of these hidden power structures. So that's what Our Republic is trying to do. If you're interested in joining us, you can just go to Our Republic. You can talk to myself or Bryce, who are both members, after this. And you can also attend our rally on May the 6th at 3 p.m. We're going to be rallying, and we've got about 10 speakers from across the political spectrum who are going to be talking to you about their vision of Scotland with an elected head of state. And I'm hoping to kind of come here and give that overview of what it might look like and keep coming back to those questions of how do we actually get this done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And it's so good to have you here and moving the discussion forward from just us complaining to actually taking some action. So thank you for taking the lead on that one. I'm going to open up to I can't speak. I'm going to open up the floor to questions, please. For the first question, can I ask that we have someone who uses she, her, or they, them pronouns? There's a sort of, if you start with men talking, you tend to end up with a whole session of men talking. So let's make sure that we're diverse. So just for this very first question, anyone who uses they, them, or she, her pronouns. Here on my left. Lovely.
My name is Fiona Ross. I've come from Angus today. I came as somebody thinking about the connection between becoming a republic and independence. And is it the chicken or the egg, and how is it connected? Because if we don't get one, how can we get the other? And so I come as somebody thinking you've got to do republic after independence, but we might be waiting a long time for independence. So I'm sure you're all aware of that, but it takes the legality, as we're finding out. So that's my question.
That's brilliant. Anyone on our panel want to take that one? I'm kind of looking at you there, John.
I think I could do this. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple, really. An independent Scotland would find it significantly easier to transform to a republic than it will if it stays within the UK. That's not going to be surprising to anyone on any end of the political spectrum. But it's not a requirement. And a lot of these processes need to be started before we get to independence, because we need to have conversations. It's not so simple as we declare independence, okay, we're a republic. What kind of republic? There's loads of variations, there's loads of decisions to be made. What works best for Scotland? What is our system? And if we can start answering those questions and begin moving forward with this idea of what is best for our country, then, and so I'm trying to come from a non-political structure here and not actually have an opinion on it, but what is best for us is the question that I want to answer. And I think anytime we ask that question, we'll come to an elected head of state. So let's start the work to get there. And if independence happens along that way, that's great. But obviously, it's simply one part of a discussion about how we get to that point, which we need to start now.
Do any of the other speakers want to come in? I'm interested in Assa's point of view.
Yeah, I think it's very important what you said. What kind of republic? Because you need to make sure that the sharing of power is fair and works for citizens. So one thing maybe I should have mentioned in my the first things I said is that it's not because like one day, wow, we wake up, it's a republic, it's going to solve everything. There's not going to be any, you won't need to acknowledge the, colonial and past and the links with slavery and the slave trade and the empire, etc. We're a republic in France. It's still a very difficult conversation to have. It's still very controversial. So I think it's a complex thing, but in the end, having a republic in the 21st century, in a modern nation, especially in a new country like an independent Scotland, would definitely be the way to go, in my opinion.
So something that's interested me, just to carry on with this topic, for what you've both said is, so John's talked about different types of republic models, which we can see in different countries. And Assa spoke about different iterations of a republic within the same country. That's a lot of variation. So I guess just both of you to continue on this theme, because I think it's quite an interesting one. Where do you start with that conversation? What's the model? Because obviously the original model of transferring from monarchy to republic in France isn't the model we're going for. So what would that look like? So I realize that John's been very realistic about where we are, but hypothetically, what does a peaceful implementation of a peaceful republic look like, Assa?
That's actually a very good question. I think maybe the monarchy can't be abolished like from one day to the other. Maybe it needs to be a gradual process. Maybe there should be a more open discussion in the media as well. It shouldn't be. I feel that in the media generally there is kind of this myth that everybody is a hardcore monarchist, like people, they really, they have like the little cups and everything with, the king's head. And I do have these cups as well. But there is this idea that people are just so fond of this institution, which I have not really seen. And I think this needs to change. And I think there needs to be a more like a diversity maybe of voices of people who, want change, be it change of the monarchy as it is, or change to a republic, or people who think that it should be a gradual change. I think that this debate should be, more mainstream maybe.
Patrick, before I take another question, did you want to come on this one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are elements of British political culture that are inherently conservative, with a small c as well as too often with a big C, and a voting system that fluctuates between the Conservative Party and Labour only coming to power when they think they can only come to power when they're offering something pretty close to the status quo instead of a radical change. So, if British political culture was amenable to challenging the idea of the monarchy, there's no way it would have survived the scandals of the last decade. So let's recognize that it is protected by a political culture at the moment. But that being said, some of the issues that John was raising about accountability of the way it exercises influence are really relevant within the UK, even if the UK continues to have a monarchy. And there'll be more and more people. The Guardian's doing terrific work at the moment on the financial abuses and this, what I call intergenerational grift that the monarchy is. The way that they're using, things that were gifted to them as official gifts to line their own private pockets. And the reaction that many people throughout the UK will have when they see golden coaches rolling down the streets in a couple of weeks' time in the midst of a cost of living crisis. Those questions are relevant in the UK, even in the current context, even to people who don't particularly want to get rid of the monarchy, but will be offended by the abuses. The last thing I'll say about independence, it is probably our most obvious route in Scotland to becoming a republic, but I've never seen independence as being about just achieving change in Scotland and leaving the rest of the UK behind. I hope independence gives us the ability to lead in ways that the rest of the UK will follow, whether that's back into Europe, whether it's toward a more equal economy, whether it's toward sustainability, whether it's toward a republic. I hope that that we choose to take those steps and do the right thing, and others look at us with envy and think they could do that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. There were two hands in the sort of third row there with the floral jacket.
Hi, thank you. My name's Jackie, she, her. I just wanted to ask also, the press, we do not have Scottish press. We will never be able to have an open and free discussion. You were saying in France it's open and free. You have French press, you don't have German press producing your newspapers, your television programs, what's been pumped into people's houses. We'll never get a fair chance of anything until we have a free Scottish press. It's unionist press, everybody knows it. It's pumped into houses 24/7. We'll never win until we get free press. And I don't know how we're going to go about that, and if we can get that before we get independence and a republic, perhaps. But I think it was down to the press that we lost 2014. That's been admitted everywhere freely. So I may be asking an impossible question, but how do we get Scottish press?
That is a really good question, Jackie. Yeah, well, thank you. I'll just share a couple of my thoughts and then I'll open it up to the panel. Within the Scottish Green Parliamentary Group, we've recently done a series of focus groups. And one of the interesting findings of that was how much distrust there is in our focus groups for the mainstream press, particularly among young people who primarily get their information from social media. So I guess my beacon of hope there is that we are in a bit of a transformational period around how information is communicated in society. Now, we're all fully aware of the issues of social media and conspiracy theories and the kind of, but mainstream press is also not trusted. So I suppose there's a question for us as a society is how do we effectively communicate ideas in the absence of a trusted press when social media is such a sort of minefield? I think, but there may be opportunities there as well. Would anyone on the panel like to comment on this point?
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue I'm very interested in, and to me, it's, again, I said the word diversity, and this is you know, the most important part. You need to have you know, a diversity of point of views, a diversity of backgrounds in newsrooms to make sure that these conversations are reflected in the media. And I think this is, you know, I feel in Scotland there is more and more talk about it. There are very important initiatives about this. There's one I'm really fond of, which is called Pass the Mic, which aims at giving, you know, a platform to people we don't really see in the media, which is women of color, you know, with really more diverse ideas, with different ideas. And I think this is what we need in the media to make sure that this conversation is happening.
I kind of wish I could offer solutions to this this issue, but I think in some ways it's an even more challenging one than the questioner has set out. I mean, you weren't wrong, but I think the issues are compounding in new ways all the time. I mean, Scotland did have a strong tradition of Scottish journalism. But it was within very much a unionist mindset. It's a little different than, you know, Welsh national identity persisted through the period of the Union in different ways. It was more around language, around culture and soft power. Scottish national identity persisted in more institutional ways through the print media, church, education, legal systems. There was more institutional definition around it. But it was all grounded in the kind of acceptance of the Union as what those institutions were there to serve, or what they were part of. And at the moment, you know, there are also, I'm really conscious that, you know, the old slogan that Politicians complaining about the media is like sailors complaining about the sea. I'm kind of conscious of that, but it is lacking in diversity in the ways that Assa described, but also in terms of socioeconomic class, in terms of perspectives on life, as our politics is often lacking in the same diversity. So it's not just who they are, it's the ways in which voices are allowed in or not to that process. And finally, as we're shifting toward, it's not just young people, huge generations now get most of their perceptions of the world and of what's happening in it from social media, which is the plaything of a billionaire class now. It's even worse in terms of the ownership and control and framing than the print media or the BBC. So, I'm aware that I'm responding to this in a way, kind of saying yes, it's bad and it's even worse, rather than offering solutions. But I think any opportunities that we can do to force open some chances for that wider range of voices to be heard, to express themselves within not just kind of capital M media, but the range of sources of expression about who we are as a society is where change can come from.
Thank you. Did you want to say anything, John?
I'm going to try, because I think there's hope. And I think the reason there's hope is because as you begin to see society change and develop, and we see fewer people buying newspapers and more people consuming things on social media, and we see generations growing up who are consuming things differently, coming to different conclusions. One of the aspects of that is, I think that as we move forward, the newspapers are going to have to follow. And if republicanism becomes mainstream, enters the Overton window, becomes a position a lot of people hold, they're going to try and sell us stuff. And what they might try and sell us, hopefully, will be good views on this subject, or at least reasonable views on this subject. And we might see things about republicanism enter into our media more as they try and sell things to us. It's maybe a little bit skeptical of me or cynical of me, but that might happen. And I think it is happening to some extent. We are seeing these things. They're being taken more seriously. I think that Charles is unpopular. I think that Andrew is hated. And I think that should be reflected in what we're seeing. And that will change. That won't necessarily mean that we'll dismantle class overnight when it comes to everything, or it doesn't mean we'll dismantle the aristocracy and everything that goes with it. But I think that things are moving in a positive direction on these topics. And there is hope to be had as things change.
Thank you, John. I know the person in front of Jackie's been very patient. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kieran. I go by they, them pronouns. And not to be greedy, but I can have two small issues.
Please.
One point that I think was very interesting was that Assa brought up that the power of the president in France is very much so under scrutiny, and the idea of a presidential executive being too domineering over the assembly or parliament of a nation is obviously actually very anti-republican, very anti-democratic, and in some ways can be almost like a monarchy in all but name. And I think but I think simultaneously that going full on into a parliamentary republic where the president or whatever elected head of state is purely ceremonial and there's no kind of oversight over that premier or first minister or prime minister or whatever you choose to call the head of government, kind of can lead in very anti-republican, anti-democratic directions eventually, because you have supposedly parliamentary democracies such as Hungary and India that have functionally turned into one-party states under fascist dictators, respectively Viktor Orban and Modi. And of course, I think that maybe a single person who is the head of state might be heading too much in that direction of a, like I said, monarchy in all but name. So I think maybe a system more like Sweden has. I think it's Sweden. It's definitely a Scandinavian country of some sort, but I think it's Sweden, where there's kind of almost like a state council that work together to work as a kind of collective head of state might be preferable in many ways to balancing the power of the president and the head of government.
Thank you, Kieran, for that question. Now that's a really interesting idea. And of course, because we have collective leadership in our party, we don't have one person at the head. And we think that there are lots of advantages to having a shared position, not only in terms of embedding our values of negotiation and consensus building into the role, but allowing some diversity in the role. And as you say, not allowing one person's view to dictate. Now that is a really interesting idea. So I think there we're starting to come on to, and this is a fascinating discussion about what different models of republics could look like. And indeed, why should we model our republic on the ones of the past? Why not create something new? What's out there? Now that is a fascinating discussion. What you say about the sort of presidential power being almost monarchy is absolutely been on my mind, because when I have this conversation with my parents, who, as I've said, are huge fans of the monarchy, their kind of main rebuttal is, well, look at Donald Trump. Is that what you'd have? It's like, oh God, and something that I find, now my parents are very, very old, their views were set many, many decades ago. But to my mind, modern democracies are quite different than what I think of as the old democracies. America, Britain, Canada are old democracies. They have that first past the post. They still have either the monarch or a president that's practically a monarch embedded in them. Modern democracies have a different structure to them. The president has less power. Now, we're still having that conversation. Does the president of France have too much? Does the president of Hungary have too much? And how does that work? So that's a continuing discussion. But it is an interesting one, because when people think of presidents, in my experience, not many people think of the very lovely, beloved president of Ireland, and too many of them think of Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, and they don't even realize that there are different versions of this out there. So thank you so much for the question. Who on our panel would like to start with this one?
Yeah,
Assa, go for it.
I'd like to comment on that. I think you're making a very valid point, and actually, people in France who are specialized on constitutional questions call our regime la monarchie présidentielle, the presidential monarchy. It's called like that by people who want to change the constitution, because the president has a lot of powers, and they think that the power should be shared more. And people who want a sixth republic basically want the president to have a little less power and parliament to have much stronger powers. The issue with the republic as we have it today is that basically the fate of parliament is there's too much of a link between the fate of parliament and the fate of a president. It didn't used to be the case until recently. Basically, we had presidential elections every 7 years and parliamentary elections every 5 years. So we had situations which we called cohabitation, where we had a president from one party and a parliament from another party, which actually forced everyone to reach some compromises. The last time was in 1997, so the president was Jacques Chirac. He was a conservative kind of center-right president, and we had a socialist, green, and communist government and parliament. They brought in, it wasn't marriage equality, but it was le Pax, which was civil partnership, I think it is in the UK. They brought the 35-hour work week. They had, there was so many really good social progress during these 5 years. And then after these 5 years, in 2002, they reduced the presidential term. It was 5 years, same as a parliamentary term, which meant that basically nobody really cared about parliamentary elections. It was all under presidential election, the election of a president. And the issue as well is that the president is elected, it's direct suffrage, so we vote directly for the president. It's kind of a cult of personality. It's not anymore really about politics, or not as much as it should be, which is a huge problem. And this is why, so nobody's really questioning the republic. The people are questioning the way we do elections, the timing of elections, and really the way that personality took over politics in France.
I mean, I suppose in some ways the question is, what is a head of state? What is it for? How should it operate? And I guess part of the difficulty with the current status quo of the monarchy being this kind of unquestioned, permanent feature is that we're not even allowed to ask the question, what is that head of state? My personal view is that the balance of what the head of state is in the British monarchy isn't actually all that wrong if it was elected, if it was temporary, as opposed to a job for life, and if it was accountable in terms of having to exercise its influence publicly and accountably. The actual balance, I wouldn't go for an executive president like the US. I wouldn't go for an entirely ceremonial one, but having some kind of constitutional role. Imagine if we had somebody like that within the UK at the moment. Some of the tensions that exist between the Scottish government and the UK government sit in the space in between what might be non-legal abuse of things like the Section 35 power or the Internal Markets Act, but actually are more likely to be abuse of political power. Maybe that we can challenge some of that in the courts, but if you had a head of state who recognized that they have the authority not to overrule one government or the other, but to intervene, to mediate, to try and achieve a functional relationship between the two levels of government, and at least some degree of respect and balance between the two, then maybe we'd have a path through some of those difficult issues that doesn't involve having to go to the courts to resolve them in a way that's probably an imperfect solution when it's actually an abuse of political power we're talking about. So, yeah, I think I'd be for something slightly in between this kind of purely rubber stamp ceremonial and the executive president, something that's probably not far different from what the head of state means in this country, so long as it was democratic and accountable. And personal view, I think I'm straying beyond party policy here at the moment. My personal view is that I wouldn't allow political parties to nominate candidates in that election or to campaign for candidates. I would want to see it taken out of the party political system so that you do have someone with the authority to engage in a almost in the way that a presiding officer or a speaker does in Parliament. They have to be neutral. There's a mic coming to you.
Thank you. You made a good point about what the definition of a head of state is, and I just want to add quickly, there is actually in some political science circles a distinction between a head of nation and a head of state, where a head of nation represents the people, and you spoke about the Irish president, who very much so stands up for the rights of the Irish people and speaks on their behalf, and speaks about the general welfare of what they need. And then a head of state is more like a symbol of state authority or governmental authority, to use a less hierarchical term.
And there's so many different potential answers to this that we can discuss if we are allowed to discuss change to the current status quo. There'd be potential, for example, in some of these functions being participative and deliberative citizen engagement rather than embodied by one person or even a small group of people, but having opportunities for whether it's citizens' assemblies or other forms of participative democracy to come in and play a role as well. John. I've gone on for far too long.
No worries. No, I was listening to all of that while I weirdly know a lot about Swedish politics. And so actually they have a ceremonial head of state who's actually their king, and he really likes cats, but he has no power at all. He gets distracted in interviews if he sees a cat, he wanders off. He's very cute. But this idea of a ceremonial head of state, I think, has a lot of value. And if you remove it from the party political system, it has value too, because you do want someone to look up to. The reason that I'm interested in this discourse is because I think that the person who we choose to lead us and represent us and whose values we choose speaks to how we behave towards each other. And when we look at the system we have, this idea that the monarchy doesn't have to follow the rules, doesn't have to pay inheritance tax, doesn't have to be honest and open about when they lobby the government. This speaks to an idea of when you get powerful enough, you are no longer accountable. And so we start with the monarch, we come to the aristocracy, We come to the madness of the Boris Johnson years when he just did whatever he wanted. He closed down Parliament when they disagreed with him. This idea that if you're powerful enough, you are unaccountable needs to be dismantled in order for us to have a proper functioning country. And what that means is we should be able to choose our head of state. We should be able to decide what we value in them. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of arguments. We're going to have to argue for a good head of state that represents what we want. And we're going to have to win those arguments. But when we do so, I really like the idea of it being taken away from political issues, because then they get to mediate, then they get to represent us, then we get to be proud of them. We get to be proud of the country we're part of because we're proud of our leaders. I think that's super important, and I really like the point.
Yeah, well done. Right. I think we've got time for about 2 more questions before closing remarks. So I can see against the wall there. Yep, yes, in black. And then I'll come to in the purple just ahead.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Stephen. I'm the editor of the Edinburgh Reporter. I guess I'm she, her. I'd just like to say that countering your argument about your point about the mainstream media, in December 2021, the Public Interest News Foundation conducted a survey, and they found that 6 out of 10 people in their survey preferred and trusted local news, such as the news that we produce. So that's why you should support your local newspapers. And we're the only other one with Edinburgh in the title. And my question for Patrick is, I know a little about Michael D. Higgins, but if you were, and I'm sorry that you've mentioned that political people shouldn't choose president, but if you were asked to choose today or tomorrow who the president or whatever name should be in Scotland, who would it be?
Fun question. Patrick for president.
Can we leave this one to a wrap-up question at the end that we can all...
That sounds like a fun idea. Is that all right?
Yeah, give us a few minutes.
Let's do that. Sorry, I'll come to Martin in a second. There was in the purple jumper there. I'll come to that one. So we'll come back to that one as our wrap-up question in just a couple of minutes. Yep.
I feel like I should have went first rather than her, but that's okay. My name's Fiona, she, her, also not a UK citizen. My point was really John, I love your optimism, and it was purely, I don't understand why we would give the monarchy any kind of phasing out. Like, they are a beacon of racism, of hierarchy. They get to do whatever they want. So at what point can Scotland sit back and just let that carry on? Like, it seems really hard. Like, we have systemic racism within the police. It's been shown. At what point are we going to handle that? We just had 30 years from when Stephen Lawrence was murdered 2 days ago. 30 years. Like, I feel like there's not been much done within the UK or Scotland at all. So why should we give them the respect to phase out the monarchy? When we have publicly seen how they've treated Meghan Markle, how they've treated Harry, that is blood. And they always say blood is thicker than water. So why would we give these people that respect? When what are they doing for us?
Yep. That's an excellent question. Anyone on the panel want to take that? I'm just going to ask people to be brief so we can get last few questions in.
So they don't deserve it. You're absolutely right. Absolutely, completely 100% right. Unfortunately, though, it's an argument that needs to be won. We can't just go about doing whatever we want because we live in something that's almost a democracy, and therefore we need to work through the systems that we have, and that takes time. And so I think that the argument is being won in terms of most people agree with the idea of we need to move on, but we need to find ways to actually do it. And that, unfortunately, is not simple. It's the same reason that you can't turn around and have an independence referendum tomorrow, because it's complicated and it's hard and it's messy.
Anyone else want to come in on that point? Yep. Nope. Good. Okay. Great. I'll take Martin. Here. Yep.
Thank you very much. I don't have a question. I just wanted to talk about Michael D. Higgins. I'm an Irish citizen, but I've had the privilege of living in Scotland, England, Germany, and the United States. Michael D. Higgins, a remarkable guy, but we should also remember that we've had great presidents before Michael D. Higgins, including Mary McAleese. And the one thing that Michael D. Higgins has, yes, he's ceremonial head of state. However, he has what they call the Council of State. The president's job in Ireland is to protect the Constitution. If legislation is brought before him, which he or the Attorney General is uneasy with, he can bring together the Council of State, and then they can refer the legislation back to Parliament if they feel it's necessary. So it's actually quite a good system, and the Council of State has been invoked on several occasions, which has been remarkable, but it's the way that business is done. So it's not just an assent to legislation. They can, the President and the Council of State can actually challenge it. Thank you, just an observation.
No, that's really helpful.
Well, it's a really good point, and you know, I'm not trying to suggest that any one model is perfect and that we should just adopt it, but the idea, for example, that at the moment we have a UK government that is that has ministers that are instructing their civil servants, you're not allowed to tell me if my policy is illegal, and now saying that they need to be able to pass laws that allow them to overrule the decisions of the courts that say that their policies are in breach of people's human rights. And there isn't a check and a balance. There isn't anyone who can step in. And the example I gave of conflict between Scottish and UK levels, you know, you could make the same case about you know, the local level of democracy, which should be protected constitutionally and all too often isn't. So, you know, for me, it's something that's in between the purely ceremonial and the executive is something that is a constitutional check and balance, but itself needs to be accountable.
Okay, Bryce. I mean, this might be our last question, and then we will return to the question as to who we each think should be president.
Hello. So I'm a Scottish Greens member, and I'm just wondering what can we do as a party to agitate people into action, because basically I think we just shared about, I think we've got a respectability politics where basically we're talking about respecting the people. I think within independence we had a really strong, very polarizing views. We had people in the streets were really very agitated, very angry, wanted to speak out and went onto the streets and did something like that. But when I then bring in Republican stuff to speak to them, they're saying, "Oh, that's an afterthought. We can discuss that later." So respectability. We got to respect the monarchy, and let's get on. Let's just keep going. Let's do this. And I think I'd like to find out what can we do as a party to agitate people, because I was at an Organising for Power workshop with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation with the trade union group, and one of the things which it says about agitating, make people angry, make people infused, make people really agitated about this. And I think this is about how can we respectfully and not respectfully agitate the general public into getting their idea to their optics of being angry about the monarchy and about how that they're, like for example, the tax money that they're paying is given directly to the royal family and things like that, and it's not tourism. It's this agitation. I really want to find out how can we agitate people as a party, because I think that's where I think we could really differ from SNP and be able to be like, do you know what? I'm not going to say the word because I'll swear away, but go and yourself up and all that, so and go there, because the thing is this, what I really want to see us basically being on the front line and saying, do you know what, you can go and just do one, Charles, and we didn't want you here, goodbye.
Thank you, Bryce. We'll thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any comments on what we as a party can do, or even as a movement, John?
You could come to Carlton Hill on May 6th at 3 p.m.
Why? What's happening there?
We're doing a rally for a republic, and we're hoping to get as many people there as possible, so hopefully we'll see you all there.
I'll be speaking there. So
Lorna will be speaking.
That's always worth saying. All right, I'm going to go down the panel. I'll start at Assa, and we'll work this way. So wrap up, what do you think we can be doing in our country to move towards a republic? And who would you like to be president? Now, I'm going to give you a coward's way out because I'm going to take the coward's way out on this one. And rather than naming an individual, say what kind of person or persons you would like to see as president.
Okay. So
name someone if you feel like it.
Oh yeah, I'll probably name someone. But I think for any successful protest, obviously people will be angry, need to channel that anger, but I think there needs also to be some optimism and some joy, and you need people to be enthused about the future. So this is something I'm really passionate about. I wrote a column about it a few weeks ago, saying actually maybe the UK and Scotland have some things to learn about the French people who are demonstrating and they're dancing and they're creating music and they're creating art, and it's also this kind of mobilization, this kind of joy that it needs to be a party, really. And I think this is something that maybe this movement should be doing when talking about the monarchy and of transitioning towards a republic. And as for who would I like to see as a head of state for Scotland, I've always thought, in my wildest dreams, it could be Jackie Kay. I love that woman. She's excellent. She has good humor. I think, she just speaks to my heart, really. And she's one of the reasons I love this country so much. The fact that, she was chosen to be the Macar of Scotland, I think it just speaks volume about, the kind of, country that Scotland aspires to be. And I think she would be an excellent president.
So closing remarks, yeah?
Well, I think we still have time for closing remarks.
Okay.
So this is answering Bryce's question and answering the question about who you'd have. Yeah.
Right. How to get people active. There are two things that you need to do. The first one is that you need to talk about it. You need to share these ideas. You need to go out there and talk to people. And that is the first way in which you activate yourself. And when you activate yourself, you go out to the rallies, like our rally on May 6th at 3 p.m. On Carlton Hill. But also you just get involved. Come talk to our Republic. Make sure that people within the Green Party know that you care about this issue. Make sure that you vote on these issues. Make sure that you talk about these issues and you bring them to the surface in meetings. That way people know that it's important to you, and when they know it's important to you, they act on it. That's how you activate your elected representatives. And the second is we need to figure out how. And to do that, we need to make sure that we're talking about ways in which we're moving forward. We need to start the process of moving forward. We need to be asking the questions. We need to be holding our elected representatives to account to answer these questions. And we do that by making a lot of noise and talking about it and activating and chatting about it and attending rallies and making them aware that it is important.
Thank you. Patrick.
I need to do the thing.
You need to name the person. Yeah, name the person. I remember the name of the person I had.
What about Judy Murray? She's a bit of a mum to the whole nation anyway, so I feel like it's a good... No.
The room's not with you there, John. The room's not with you there.
Oh dear, okay. I've done something wrong, I'll hide.
Sorry, I agree with the Republic.
I think the election has begun already, hasn't it? Yeah, I mean, obviously the party wants to be provocative on this issue at this time. That's why we're having this session today. It's why we've been putting out some messages in the media, and it's why we'll be on the Hill on the 6th. We were offered to go somewhere else on that day. We were offered tickets to go down to London. And watch the golden carriages and all of this kind of stuff. And I told them I was washing my hair. So, but let's just also acknowledge this is not just a one-time thing. This is not just about using the coronation as a moment when we can get noticed for talking about this. Because Charles, with the best will in the world, I don't wish ill on people as individuals, but he's in his mid-70s. He's going to be in this office for some time, but nowhere near as long as the last monarch. And his son is, in his early 40s, mid-40s or something now? Early 40s. So is likely, if that succession happens, to be the monarch for a much longer period after that. So we've got probably a short window between the death of the last monarch, the coronation of Charles, and the next succession. And I think that gives us a window of opportunity to be talking, not just because he's less popular than Elizabeth was, but because there's a sense of change and turbulence. And if change is on the agenda, then we should be able to shape that change and decide what kind of change it's going to be. As for who, I'd be happy to vote for Jackie. I think that's a terrific idea. Colleagues in the party know that I crowbar at least one Doctor Who reference into everything that I do. Scotland has a good track record, a good hit rate in getting Scottish Doctor Whos. So how about when Ncuti Gatwa steps down as the Doctor, he becomes the President of Scotland? How about that?
Totally here for that. Yeah.
But in some ways, I think what I would like to see in an election for a future head of state is to hear from people that I've never heard of, people that I can't name because they aren't necessarily coming with a track record of fame or profile or whatever, folk who have got their roots in their communities, folk who are bringing something new into politics, and that's kind of why I would like it not to be someone from a political party background as well.
Brilliant.
But if we get Ncuti Gatwa,
I'm
happy with
totally here for Ncuti Gatwa. That would be very cool. Right, so I'm going to answer Bryce's. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to answer Bryce's question. I'm going to say who I would want for president, and then I'm going to give my closing remarks, and then go back this way and do closing remarks. So we'll finish on Assa, and that should hopefully get us to past. Whew, it's going to be beautiful. Okay, right. So in terms of what we can do, I think that conversation is so important because I think people are reasonably either. This is something you care about and you know about and you think it should be a republic, or something you really haven't really thought about and you thought that, putting up a bit of bunting was a bit of fun. And why are you stopping me from having fun? So I think to try and have that conversation about the harm that is caused, I think is important because people genuinely don't know. I had this argument with my parents' neighbor when I was in Canada because when you do the job I do, people just want to talk to you about politics all the time. So I was on the front lawn walking past their house and they were like, why are you so against the monarchy? I'm like, they don't pay their taxes. And she said, you don't know that? Like, literally my job to know that. Anyway, so there's an element that people genuinely don't know what the harms are, and I think we've talked about some of those today. So yeah, having those conversations, I think we as a party can be bolder about making that part of our platform and about explaining why. It's a bigger part that we have to do generally as a party. Our 4 core values, the 4 core values of the Green Movement. We are of course well known for as being a party of environmentalists, but the equality, the democracy, and the thank you. It's equality, democracy, sustainability, and thank you. Getting all of them in there. Oh, it's not good. Making sure that we are clear that P is nonviolence is the other one. Nonviolence. That all these are part of are part of our value system. So that's a kind of ongoing piece of work because that is something people talk to me about a lot as well, saying to me, why do you talk about LGBTQ plus stuff all the time? You're the Green Party. I'm like, that's why, because it's all part of the same thing. So this conversation, we talk a lot about the powerless and supporting empowerment of the powerless, but we also need to talk about the powerful and how inequality has to be corrected from both directions. And that's why we can have this part of the conversation. Now, the person that I think I would like to have as president, and someone can maybe, I don't have my phone with me, it's a young woman, a poet, Penny, something on the internet. She does Gaelic poetry on the internet. So Penny Lively, Penny Red, something like that. Lenny Penny, yeah. That's who I would like for president because she's a young Scottish woman. She's a poet. She's very articulate. She's very good at defending herself and her values. So that's who I would have because I think there's this idea that presidents need to be older. When you picture president in your mind, you do picture an old white guy, don't you? Let's mix that up a little bit. So I think that would be cool. Okay, so for my closing remarks. Listening to this conversation today, I think was fascinating. I thought Kieran's question was particularly interesting in terms of making us go from what we don't like to what would we actually like. And I think there's some interesting opportunities here, not just in this conversation around monarchy, but in our conversation around Scottish independence. Because one of the most powerful and exciting things, I think, about Scottish independence is the chance to look at our constitution. Constitutions are enduring documents. They last a long time, but they have built, when they're written down, but they have built into them, as Assa points out in France, and as we know from other countries, the mechanisms for them to change. We can amend those. They give you that opportunity to periodically have a national conversation about what kind of country do you want to be? What kind of values do we represent? But the UK, with an unwritten constitution, we never get that opportunity. It doesn't happen. So part of Scottish independence is not only fixing all the things we all talk about, but having that conversation and putting in place the mechanisms by which to have those conversations. So I think that that is a really exciting opportunity. But I worry that because of where we are in post-Brexit Britain, because of where we are in the vested interests kind of hunkering down against the attack from, what are we, urban elite, woke, I don't know, wine barber. Anyway, they're definitely feeling on the back foot. You can tell they're feeling on the back foot by how nuts they go whenever Patrick or I are in the dispatch box. Cultural Marxists, excellent. So, but you can definitely feel that they're feeling on the back foot. And my worry is that the monarchy becomes a mark of British exceptionalism that then gets attached to all that stuff. We have to have the monarchy because we're different. We don't want to be like those Europeans over there in their crazy ways. And so I guess that's my worry, is that there's this kind of hunkering down and tightening up of that camp. So we need to kind of crack that open a bit to make sure that that conversation can be had and unlink some of those issues, because they are not all connected together. And to just conclude on the question about the coronation is quite an interesting one. Again, because my monarchy is something I discuss with my parents a lot, so this came up. Obviously, Patrick and I declined the invitation to the coronation. My mother was horrified. She's like, but you'd have the opportunity to be part of history. It's like, Mum, I'm one of the first 2 Green ministers ever to serve in the UK. I'm already part of history. And but because of how history is taught in schools, we are taught that history is, let's memorize the kings, let's memorize the queens. We are taught that that is history. It isn't the struggle. It isn't the daily struggle of life. It isn't the changes that make a difference on the ground. And I think that that is a shame, because it erases the real parts of history, which is how people and society have changed, and it erases all those millions of people that have been part of that change. So I'll leave you with that thought, and we'll go back down the line for closing remarks, and I'll go to Patrick next.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thank you again for being part of today with us, choosing to spend some time with us discussing these issues. As Lorna described a constitution being more than just a set of rules for how governance is supposed to happen. It's something that embodies what constitutes us. What is it that constitutes us as a society, as a country, as a nation? I think it's almost inevitable that we will at some point decide to redefine that. And the idea that the UK's current political status quo is so fragile, so unconfident in itself that it needs to wrap itself up in all of this pomp and ceremony and propaganda, I think tells us something about the fact that it is not as permanent as it pretends to be. And all we need is to know that we have permission to discuss this, to debate this, and to decide this question. I think increasingly the idea of those dwindling cohorts who do line the streets when the monarchy passes or when the royal family are in town, I think they're going to increasingly feel like a remnant of a bygone era, and an era that probably shouldn't be much missed. I think this change is likely to come about during the lifetimes of the people in this room. And I think that we have the responsibility not just to to help bring that about, but to shape it and decide what kind of change it is going to be and what will constitute us as a genuinely democratic society in the future. So thank you for being part of the conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. One of the things that our republic wants to do is stimulate discussion, and this has been probably the most organized discussion on republicanism that's happened in Scotland for decades. I know that might sound crazy to you all, but it's true. And the only way we begin this process is by having conversations and by disagreeing and creating ideas and having discourse and beginning a process of bringing this into our political discourse. And you've all started that today. So thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for doing this.
I've really enjoyed this morning as well, so thank you for having me. It was very stimulating, and I leave this event just thinking, what I find interesting is that people might think that, the UK is quite isolated in this debate about the monarchy. Should we transition to republic? Should we get rid of kings and queens? But actually, in European monarchies, this debate has happened as well. Spain has had it. Belgium recently, the vice prime minister, he went on live radio and said, actually, I've never hidden my convictions. I don't like the monarchy. Doesn't make any sense. So it's happened there as well and in other countries. But I think maybe in a more relevant manner in the Caribbean, in countries that still have, the British monarch as head of state, they're also having this conversation. And I think it's very, very important to listen to them because they have an extremely different experience of what the monarchy means. And I think this country should learn about this history as well. I feel it's still quite taboo, quite controversial to talk about it, even though, the links between the British monarchy and, the British Empire, obviously, the slave trade, etc. It's very well documented. It's not, I don't think it's a controversial thing to say. Historians have worked on it for, decades, really. And this is a thing I'm saying about the UK. Obviously, this is something that is, can be said about France as well. We know very little about the history of the French overseas territories. And this is one of the reasons why the Republic today is not in the best of states, because we struggle to find a way to tell our history that binds us together. It's not really about being ashamed or something like this. It's not helping anyone to have people, white people ashamed. It's not helping me, basically. What we need, though, is that people to acknowledge this shared history and all the pain that came with it and, why we are here today. And I think this is a massive debate. It's not going to happen overnight. It's about education. It's about just people being about to debate these things without feeling, personally attacked in their identities. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for wrapping us up on that powerful note, Assa. And thank you all for coming and being with us today, and for all of you for coming and being with us today. So we've got about half an hour. We still have the room for people to mingle and chat. Oh, bang on time. We're so good. To mingle and chat and carry on the conversation. So thank you again. And thanks to everyone who's organized and supported us today.
Thank you.